It was just past 5:45 a.m. when Captain James Harper walked through the sliding glass doors of Terminal C. The airport was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes. Dim lighting overhead, echoes of suitcase wheels on tile, and the scent of burnt coffee drifting from a barely open cafe. James wasn't in uniform. He never traveled in uniform when off duty or heading into prep. Too many stares, too many questions, too many people assuming they could ask for flight updates mid-bagel. Today, he wore a black turtleneck, fitted dark jeans, and a plain travel jacket. In one hand, he rolled a black carry-on. In the other, he carried his flight case, a slim, hard-edged briefcase that held his pilot's license, iPad, headset, and the starched uniform he'd put on once he reached the crew prep room. He walked with quiet confidence, not rushed, not lost. A man who knew exactly where he was going. But none of that mattered. Not to her. From across the terminal, she saw him. A white woman in her late 40s, blonde bob, yoga pants tucked into pristine white sneakers. The kind of woman who wore confidence like perfume, heavy, unmistakable, and designed to overpower. She stepped in front of her rolling suitcase and planted herself between James and the crew security checkpoint. "Excuse me," she called out, waving her arm toward a nearby security guard. "I think this man is trying to cut the line." James slowed to a stop. At first, he thought she might be speaking to someone else. But then she turned fully toward him, lips pursed, voice rising. "He just walked straight through the side gate. That's for pilots and staff only. He's not even in uniform." Heads turned. A businessman lowered his phone. A teenager stopped unwrapping his breakfast sandwich. James took a slow breath, unzipped his jacket slightly, and pulled his airline ID badge from the front pocket. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I'm with the airline. I'm scheduled to fly today." She didn't even look at the badge. Her eyes flicked over his face, his clothes, and back to the guard. "That could be fake. I've seen people try this before. No uniform, no accountability." The TSA officer approached, uncertain. "Sir, I'm going to need to take a look at your ID again." James held out his credentials without resistance. Pilot's license. Company-issued IDFAA crew member certificate. All valid, all official. Still, the woman wouldn't let it go. "I just think in today's world, we can't be too careful. I mean, come on. Does he really look like a captain to you?" James didn't react. He had heard that sentence before. Not always those exact words, but the same message. You don't belong here. Not looking like that. He didn't raise his voice, didn't match her energy. He just said, "I'll wait while you verify everything." The security guard nodded, awkward now, and walked toward the terminal desk with James's ID in hand. The woman stood nearby, arms folded triumphantly. She thought she had done the right thing, stopped something, protected someone. But what she'd really done was show everyone watching exactly who she was. And soon, she was about to find out exactly who he was. James stood off to the side near a column as his credentials were being verified. Again. He'd been through this routine before. He had memorized the rhythms of disbelief, the pause, the suspicion, the need to double-check what had already been proven. Behind him, the woman, now fully in her element, continued narrating her version of events to anyone within earshot. "I mean, I'm not trying to be rude," she said, loud enough for half the terminal to hear. "But these days, you never know who's pretending to be what. Anyone can just say they're staff. I'm just keeping everyone safe." James could feel the heat building at the base of his neck. Not from anger, but from the familiar tightness of humiliation worn too many times. He turned slightly to her and spoke with quiet restraint. "You didn't ask." You assumed she blinked, caught off guard by how calmly he responded. "I assumed because you're not in uniform," she shot back. "That's not a race thing. It's a common sense thing." But her words betrayed her. Because standing just 20 feet away was another man. White, mid-30s, also not in uniform, carrying a duffel marked CREW, who had walked straight through the same checkpoint with nothing more than a nod. No questions, no second glance, no security. James noticed. So did the TSA agent. So did the teenage boy, who had stopped unwrapping his breakfast earlier. but no one said a word. The security officer returned, slightly flushed. He held James's documents like a man realizing he'd been pulled into something beneath his dignity. "Everything checks out, Captain," he said, using the title now, like a subtle apology. "You're cleared." "Sorry for the delay," James gave a small nod, reclaiming his ID with steady hands. The woman narrowed her eyes. "Captain?" The officer looked at her, uncomfortable now. "Yes, ma'am. He's flying today. One of our pilots." Her jaw tightened. "Oh, well, it's just, he wasn't dressed like one. That's all I was saying." James stepped forward, pausing next to her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "What you were saying," he said softly, "is that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly be who I say I am." Then he walked away, without waiting for her to respond. No mic drop, no applause, just truth. And it landed harder than any insult ever could. The airport hadn't stopped moving. It never did. But for a moment, it felt like the whole concourse had slowed. Passengers shuffled forward in line, pretending not to have heard what just happened. The woman, the one who had called security, stayed rooted in place, flipping through her boarding pass like it might offer her a better excuse than the one already spoken. But the damage was done. The moment had passed, and nobody had done anything. Not the gate agents who watched from behind the desk. Not the white businessman in the blue blazer who met James's eyes, then quickly looked away. Not even the TSA officer, who had returned the credentials but offered no apology beyond a change in tone. They had all seen it. They had all recognized it. And still, they said nothing. James walked with slow, even steps through the crew corridor toward the staff-only prep area. He didn't break stride, but inside, he felt the familiar weight settle across his shoulders again. Not from his flight bag, but from history. The burden of being other in a room full of silence. How many times had he felt it? In pilot lounges, where no one sat next to him. In security lines where his ID drew extra eyes. In gate areas where passengers looked startled to see him enter the cockpit. He didn't need people to defend him. He just needed them to see, and to care enough to speak. But more often than not, people like the woman who confronted him were loud, and those who disagreed were quiet. Too quiet. At the checkpoint, the teenage boy who had watched the whole thing tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "he really was the pilot?" His mother, early 40s, reading glasses on her head, business casual, gave a small nod, trying to focus on her phone. "Yes, baby." "Why'd she try to stop him?" he asked, not letting it go. She hesitated. "Because some people think they know what a pilot's supposed to look like." The boy glanced toward the secured hallway where James had disappeared. "He looked cool. I'd want to fly with him." His mom gave a tight smile. "Yeah, me too." Then silence again. Not confrontation, not correction. Just reflection. Small, quiet. But maybe enough to start something. Gate B-17 was already alive with motion as passengers milled around the boarding area, balancing coffees and carry-ons, watching the standby list on the overhead screen flicker every few seconds. A young staff member from the airline, Kylie, barely out of college and still a little intimidated by her radio headset, glanced up from her screen just in time to spot him. Her eyes widened. "Captain Harper!" She stood up instinctively. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Your crew has already checked in. They're waiting for you in the prep lounge near the jet bridge." James smiled politely. "Got held up at security. Someone needed proof I was allowed to walk through my own airport." Kylie's face dropped. "Oh no. Was it someone from TSA?" "Not exactly." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Kylie flushed, embarrassed on behalf of a system she didn't create, but somehow still represented. "I'll walk you back," she offered, flustered but eager to make it right. They passed by the boarding area just as a familiar voice, hers, piped up again. The woman from earlier, now seated in a prime aisle seat near the gate, looked up with fresh disbelief. Her eyes locked on James, now standing beside the uniformed agent. "That's him," she muttered to her seatmate, still pretending. But then she saw something that froze her in place. Kylie tapped her radio. "Gate to crew. Captain Harper has arrived." A voice crackled through. "Copy that." Inform the team. Captains cleared and confirmed. And then came the ripple. From the jet bridge, 2 flight attendants stepped out in full uniform. One of them, an older male with a thick Midwestern accent, smiled wide and gave James a crisp salute. "Morning, Captain," he said loudly. "We're ready when you are." Passengers turned, conversation stopped, and Karen saw it all. James nodded calmly and walked past her. Same clothes, same energy, same man. But now the weight of doubt was no longer his to carry. It shifted. To her. She opened her mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to excuse, but nothing came, because there was nothing left to say. He wasn't pretending. He was in command. The terminal had grown quieter, not physically, but emotionally. The energy shifted. Eyes that had once followed James with suspicion now tracked him with something else. Awareness. A few even with guilt. But she, the woman who had sparked the entire scene, wasn't done yet. Karen stood from her seat. She clutched her tote bag and walked briskly up to the gate desk where James stood signing off on his pre-flight documents. Her tone was different now. Not confrontational, but tight, defensive, and shaky in the way that always followed being publicly wrong. "Excuse me," she said with a clipped smile. "I just wanted to clarify something." James didn't look up right away. He finished signing, handed the tablet back to the agent, and then turned calmly to face her. His expression was unreadable. Karen continued, flustered by his silence. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I saw you go through security and thought you were skipping the line. It was early. People do crazy things at airports. I thought maybe you were trying to... it's happened before." She trailed off, realizing that nothing she was saying sounded any better out loud. James tilted his head slightly. "And you called security?" She nodded. "Only because I didn't look like a pilot." Karen blinked. "That's not fair. I didn't say that." "No," James said softly. "You didn't have to." A few nearby passengers watched now, not pretending to ignore it anymore. Karen's voice shrank. "I was being cautious. That's all. In today's world, James cut in gently, people still see someone who looks like me and assume I'm the threat, or the liar, or the criminal." She tried to answer, but her mouth stayed open, waiting for words that wouldn't come. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken, and it had an echo. "You don't know how often this happens," he continued. "At airports, in hotels, even in the cockpit when I greet passengers, some still ask if I'm the real captain." Karen looked away. Shame was a heavy garment. It didn't wear well on those unused to it. "I hope," James said, "the next time your gut tells you someone doesn't belong, you'll ask yourself why before you act on it." And with that, he turned and walked toward the jet bridge. He didn't need an apology. He didn't expect one. Because in that moment, she wasn't the one who deserved peace. The walkway to the jet bridge felt different this time. Not because of the steps, but because of the silence that followed James Harper as he walked away from the confrontation. This time, he wasn't alone in that silence. People were listening, not clapping, not cheering, but listening. And in a world that had so often ignored men like him, that silence was louder than applause. As James entered the prep area, his first officer, Dana Cruz, stood waiting by the aircraft door. She grinned the moment she saw him. "Rough morning, Captain?" "You could say that," James replied with a dry smile, unzipping his jacket. "Terminal Karen?" she asked casually, like it was a known turbulence pattern. "Something like that." James reached into his carry-on and pulled out his uniform. Dark blue slacks, white shirt, stripes shining across the shoulders. He slipped into it quickly and adjusted his epaulets with precision. With each motion, the transformation was visual, but the man inside hadn't changed at all. He'd always been the captain. Now, the world could see it too. As he stepped out toward the boarding gate, the flight crew had already lined up. The lead flight attendant, a seasoned woman with silver hair and steel in her eyes, offered him a salute, not mockingly, but sincerely. Her voice was warm, full of conviction. "Captain Harper on deck." The other crew members followed, some nodding, some clapping gently. The gesture wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't for show. It was for him. A quiet tribute. a shared understanding. One of the gate agents, visibly moved by what had happened earlier, spoke up as well. "We're proud to fly with you, Captain, and we've made a note of what happened. It won't disappear." James nodded. That was all he needed. Acknowledgement, not pity. As the boarding announcement began and passengers stood to line up, James moved toward the plane, but not before something unexpected caught his attention. A small black boy, maybe 6 or 7, was standing near the front of the gate, eyes wide as he stared at James's uniform. His mother stood beside him, whispering something, encouraging him. The boy stepped forward hesitantly. "Are you the pilot?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. James crouched slightly, smiled. "I'm the captain," he said. The boy's eyes lit up. "Cool." James extended his hand. The boy shook it with both of his, and then, from the back of the gate area, a slow ripple of applause began. Not loud, not performative, just genuine. From a handful of passengers who had watched everything unfold earlier and knew somehow that this moment deserved acknowledgement. James stood tall, nodded to the crowd, and stepped onto the jet bridge. No one had handed him respect today. He had flown through turbulence and earned it again. The cockpit was calm, familiar. Captain James Harper ran through his pre-flight checklist, fingers moving with muscle memory. Switches flipped, gauges checked, co-pilot confirmed. The hum of the aircraft systems filled the space, like a quiet orchestra tuning before performance. Outside the cockpit window, the tarmac was glowing under the soft morning sun. The sky was still streaked with gold. A new day. His first officer, Dana, finished logging final numbers and glanced over. "Cabin's ready, Captain." James nodded. He tapped the mic, waited for the chime, and spoke, his voice calm, collected, and commanding. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 267, non-stop service to Denver. We're fully fueled, fully staffed, and cleared for takeoff." In the cabin, a few passengers looked at each other with recognition. The same voice they'd heard calmly explain himself to security was now speaking to them from the left seat of their flight deck, the one in charge. He continued, "We'll be taking off shortly, with smooth weather ahead. Thank you for choosing to fly with us, and thank you for your patience this morning." He clicked off the mic. As the plane taxied onto the runway, James placed both hands gently on the yoke. He didn't think about the woman. Not anymore. She was part of a story, but not the headline. Instead, he thought of the boy at the gate, the handshake, the awe. He thought of his younger self, watching planes from behind chain-link fences, wondering if someone like him would ever be trusted to fly one. And now, here he was, trusted, responsible, in command. The tower cleared them for departure. "Let's fly," he said. The engines roared to life. The runway rushed beneath them, and within seconds, the plane lifted into open sky. And with it, so did every part of him that had once been told he didn't belong.